computer. So I hope you're all okay with recording this event. I want to thank you all for attending today, and I hope you'll bear with possibly slow technical, not glitches, but sort of slower transitions than normal. But I want to thank you very much for attending. I also want to mention that we have a really very interesting program planned for November. It's November 21st, where we have two speakers from who are experts in Irish crime writing, who've published a recent sort of compendium of Irish crime writing. Beth Mannion at NYU, and the other gentleman whose name, of course, escapes me, who is a resident here. But I hope you'll join us for that. It's really going to be very interesting. And I'm going to share my screen now and commence with my talk, if that's okay. My notion today is to present sort of findings, encounters that I've had, and some ways of interpreting this very, I think, important and resonant place. So rather than having sort of fixed conclusions on the material, I'd like to present it as an encounter. So I'm going to commence. The talk's called Irish Graves of Mission Dolores. And here you see a photograph, I believe it's 1868, which shows you the graveyard of the mission in a much larger state than it is today. It used to extend all the way up to, I believe, Church Street from Dolores, if I'm not mistaken. So the Irish Americans are typically, in popular accounts of the history of San Francisco, not given as much credit as perhaps not commensurate with their actual numbers and roles and ubiquity in San Francisco, in early San Francisco history, and are moreover almost completely absent from stories of the contemporary city, which seems to be actually these days dominated by this lot. The bland god put Mark Zuckerberg in his lot. I mentioned bring up Mark Zuckerberg because his notorious Mission District compound is not several hundred yards from the today's focus on the graveyard. Yet remnants and essences lurk in the very earliest pale of settlement in the city, gathered in one tiny, evocative sliver of cemetery land at Mission Dolores. The graves in the mission, here's the mission. This is an antique map of one of the very earliest maps of the city. And you'll see Mission de San Francisco and the Presidio is the only two sort of prominent features of European settlement. And the Mission of San Francisco, right adjacent to a lagoon, and the location of water and good weather and good soil. So that settlement there, predates, we can pretty confidently say settlement predates, heavy settlement in that part of the peninsula actually predates the Europeans. The mission itself, of course, has stood on its present site since its building. The graves in the mission tell fragments of individual stories. They suggest collective experience. They speak powerfully of a people's web of relationships in the history of a community. The gravestones themselves are symbolic. If one cares to lend one's attention in this sanitized, networked, privileged mission district of today, they can, if one spends the time, generate a deep affinity for the continuum of community life from the deep past. Mission San Francisco de Asís, more commonly known as Mission Dolores, was the sixth mission to be established by Padre Funibero Serra in 1776. The mission's chapel, built in 1791 with more than 36,000 adobe bricks, survived the great earthquake and fire of 1906 and is the oldest intact building in San Francisco. It has been in continuous occupancy and use since its founding. The settlement, of course, was named for St. Francis of Assisi, but was also commonly known as Mission Dolores for a nearby creek named Arroyo de los Dolores, or Creek of Sorrows, which, given the history with the Native American population, is probably a wholly appropriate appellation. The graveyard, the Campo Santo Cementerio, is a small overgrown pocket of one of the oldest quarters of settlement on the San Francisco Peninsula, a setting that evokes a California past that predates even the Spanish and Mexican eras. The several dozen graves nestled next to the bright white adobe mission church are a motley jumble of stone monuments effaced by time and weather.
And web.
The iconography inside the chapel bears witness to the march of an expansionist mission church of the 18th century. a lot of guys holding swords. This is the picture on the right there is Father Thomas Pendergrast. So the Irish clergy were represented even in the earliest years. While the gravestones themselves give silent testimony to the many pursuits of the community members of the 1850s, their family lives and tragedies, and the passions they invoked among their survivors. The ground is saturated with the remains and essences of the old city in the Native American tribes. In addition to them, the Spanish, Mexican, French, German, Italian, and very prominently Irish residents of the community. Here rest the remains of Francisco de Haro, the first alcalde of San Francisco, Don Palu, second in command to Padre Serra, the remains of as many as 5,500 Native Americans now recognized in memorial, and the final resting place of some 154 Irish men, women, and children, who comprise fully half of the graves on the current small site. Interred here between 1851 and 1877. Here's the list on the site that you can see. It's very easy to understand who's buried here from this chart and the count. So we have these numbers: 306 named people, 170 graves, 154 Irish people of the 306, of whom are Irish surname, I should say, of whom 64 are female, and more than 24 children. The literal roots of the Irish community in San Francisco are here in this sliver of land, and Irish people remained in the immediate surrounding neighborhood, the Mission District, for generations. This beautiful basilica, of course, was built in 1923. Relatives of mine, including my great-grandmother, were members of this parish, and was obviously the center of the community life at the time. So, you know, these are photographs of people from roughly the teens and 20s, residents in the community. Here is a bit of charming ephemera that I found, a program of entertainment at the Valencia Hall by the youngsters of the Mission Dolores Parish in celebration of St. Patrick's Day, 1913. And here you read the program. The entertainment given by Mission Dolores Parish at the Valencia Theater starts with a medley of Irish airs, and then in the opening chorus, which includes Miss Mary Kearney, Annie Casey, Helen Tracy, Teresa Brennan, Irene Grundy, May Scanlon, Mary Kerrigan, Bree Garrity, and others, followed by the Irish Colleens, minstrels, Nellie Cummings and Jewel Dinnigan, among others. The evidence of whole classes here of healthy children in the Mission District in the same area in the early 20th century are in stark contrast to the tragic circumstances of childhood that can be inferred from the gravestones of the 1850s, only 2 generations before. The homely inscriptions on the Irish family memorials bear witness to the untimely deaths of children like little Charlie O'Neill, aged 7, upon whose gravestone is inscribed, "The last sad gift which a mother's love can bestow upon his mortal remains, calmly sleeping here." These deaths of women and little children are all the more poignant as women and little children were so scarce in San Francisco at the time. The population of the city was overwhelmingly unattached, undomesticated males for an entire generation from the gold rush. During a period when women were a mere 7% of the population of the state, and I'm open to correction, Jim Walsh, if this is inaccurate, but I'm understanding that it is accurate. But the women represented nearly half of the burials in this graveyard at the same time. The arrival of females in the population among the undomesticated males, what can be read as the extension of normalcy, of the establishment of community, of settlement and family and educational life and religious life, and all the normal things that people do when they build community. We might try to speculate how these many women arrived. Were they direct from Ireland by transshipment from the East Coast via the Panama Isthmus, or around the Horn, or overland by wagon train? Settlement in as far west a place as San Francisco usually required legitimate skills and capital, a lust for quick wealth or adventure, deep criminal resourcefulness, some obscure and valuable talents, or just simple animal energy. How did women fit into this scenario? Our friend and esteemed scholar David Emmons writes in Beyond the Pale, his great work of scholarship on the Irish and the American West, women were a lot less eager to head west to undertake a pioneer adventure for its own sake. Irish women, most unmarried, headed west as willingly as anyone else, but were more focused on long-term practicalities and much more open to building bridges to other groups. These graves then represent a pioneering contingent of women establishing the foundations of community. Many built bridges to other ethnic communities, like Catherine M. here, a beloved wife of Peter Beretta. So in those days, I imagine marrying an Italian gentleman represented mixed marriage. The gravestone memorial by Francis J. Tracy to consort Catherine and infant suggests an unconventional family arrangement, nevertheless sanctioned and recognized in the Catholic sacred burial ground. Now, wouldn't you like to know the story of Catherine from the city of New Orleans? We have cases where men, young to middle age, died in heroic or criminal endeavors, like James Deasy, heroic, 23, of the Crescent Engine Fire Company, a young fireman lost to disaster, or Thomas Murray of the Columbian Engine Company on Bush Street, dead at 26, the night of January 27, 1855. These men were members of popular and very close-knit fire brigades with clubhouses, equipment, group rituals, and paraphernalia. The scoundrels of the era were well represented as well. Sorry, I'm letting somebody in. James Casey, assassin of ne'er-do-well newspaperman James King of William, was executed by the Vigilance Committee in 1856 with an associate, Charles Cora, who's also buried here with his wife, Belle Cora. And here's Casey's gravestone here.
Library building.
May God forgive my persecutors. Rest in peace. And also buried here is James Casey's associate, the notorious James Yankee Sullivan, born in Bandon, County Cork as James Ambrose, who prior to coming to America was a London prizefighter, an Australian convict, a founding member of the notorious Sydney Ducks gang, and like many persons adrift, found himself in San Francisco in the mid-1850s as an enforcer, what's called a shoulder striker, in service to criminal and political entrepreneur James Casey. He was found dead in his cell, allegedly, though highly unlikely, by suicide, by the Vigilance Committee, by coincidence, on May 4th, 1856. These parting thoughts were inscribed by his friends on his memorial stone, who were, it can be inferred, suspicious of claims that he had committed suicide. Remember not, Lord, our offenses, nor those of our parents. Neither take thou vengeance of our sins. Thou shalt bring my soul out of tribulation, and in thy mercy thou shalt destroy mine enemies, which is more reminiscent of this character from Pulp Fiction, if I might have a little artistic license. These are stories. These are the stories of heroes, scoundrels, and adventurers, but also the steady, persistent, tragic cadence of early death from disease and tragic accident. We have many graves of infants and small children and young adults in their prime years, their lives snuffed out by disease and misfortune. In many cases, their mothers and fathers or spouses surviving many years to pine for the lost loved ones. And here's just a brief tour of some of the gravestones. So here in 1863, the husband, Patrick Murphy, and 2 children died. Bridget Murphy obviously survived to age 50, so lived 14 years after the death of her husband and 2 children. She writes, "The night dew that falls, though in silence it weeps, shall brighten with verdure the space where he sleeps, and the tears that we shed, though in secret it rolls, shall long keep his memory green in our soul." Here's John Keenan, 1858 at 32. Having lost Margaret Isabella at age 4, 11 months, 11 days. Margaret O'Connell, age 28, her little child, she'd lost 2 years earlier. Mary, age 3 months, and also then her husband, Anthony O'Connell. I was able to find actually the obituary in the newspaper for John McNamara, who was from County Tipperary, ripe age of 51. We also have the location of his wake and then the funeral at St. Joseph's Church, where High Mass was held. This is an interesting structure. In 1855, erected by Maurice Scanlon for himself and family, a little house for the wife and son. I don't know if there's anything particularly interesting to us about the shape of the structure, but it'd be interesting to understand. So the graveyard and the graveyards, because San Francisco used to be full of them, were, of course, the center of an entire economy of the departed, of death, and rituals of death, which were mastered in stereotype, but also in fact, mastered and dominated by Irish Americans in ensuing years from the 1850s. You know, the stereotype of the Irish politician, parish priest, and the nun, providing comfort and counsel to the bereaved, the funeral director, is widely accepted because, at a time you could understand it to be largely accurate. Duggan's funeral service was one of a whole group of funeral homes in the Mission District. In the 1910s and 20s, there were 44 funeral homes in the city, including Driscoll's, Sir, and Weibel. And of course, Sir is the family of former police chief Greg Sir. The Duggan, now two Duggan homes, Riley, Goodwin, and Scannell, Gander, Felder, and Kenny. The Sullivan home on Upper Market, McAvoy and O'Hara in the Richmond District, among many others. With 2 to 3 funeral homes on every block of Valencia Street at one time, gathered there because of ready access to the road and rail lines leading directly out from Valencia Street to the cemeteries in Colma, like Holy Cross, the Marble Orchard, and Malloy's Tavern. Malloy's, seen there on the right, the old roadhouse in Colma, directly opposite the entrance to the Catholic cemetery, has served to lighten the spirits of the bereaved for well over 100 years, with a comforting embrace of alcohol, dark wood, and journeyman bartending. In the old days, Malloy's was surrounded by the Irish death business out by the cemetery. Mullaney's Monuments, the McMahon House Saloon, Donahoe and Keogh Monuments, and mourners from Duggan's, Driscoll's, and Sullivan mortuaries in the city were visited in a steady stream of celebrants throughout the year. So for mid-century politicians who grew up and spent their entire lives in the old working class ethnic neighborhoods, like State Senator Tom Maloney, seen here on the opening, I believe it's at the Bay Bridge, and Assemblyman John Francis Horan from St. Mary's Park neighborhood. Making the rounds at wakes and funerals was a regular essential practice of retail politics. So there are a variety of ways to approach this topic, and they're not limited, I don't think, to purely sort of academic, though it has its value, purely academic ways of approaching and understanding what a graveyard like this represents. And if you want to immerse in the sort of Irish way of thinking about things, none better than, and Imelda will correct me on the pronunciation, represented by this marvelous masterpiece, Graveyard Clay, Crenakilla by Marcino Kine, which is a story of the graveyard of a village in which the dead are literally not dead. They're merely interred, but they are carrying on a cacophonous conversation amongst themselves day in and day out without cessation. So, graves of the deceased do represent communities that are beyond time, perennial, and deeply rooted. They lend perspectives that are likewise timeless, perennial, and rooted. They sort of force us to think that way because it's death is the ultimate reality that we all face. David Emmons wrote in Beyond the Pale of the distinctive ties of community among the Irish in the West and how those ties extended and intermingled with the domain of the dead. He wrote, Irish childhood homes, of course, this being the Irish in the West, their childhood homes were in Ireland. The physical attachment, of course, had been severed, but the psychological bonds were still stronger than death. The Irish in the West had committed, the Irish who had emigrated to the West had committed the one unpardonable sin. They had left Ireland without ever leaving it behind or displacing it in their affections. So in a sense, they had dual loyalties, divided loyalties. And this was rooted in their relationship to the imaginative world, and their imaginative universe to the dead. Irish community life included exiled generations long removed. It also included past generations long dead. That included the interred dead, who were as much a part of home as anyone or anything. Americans could not possibly understand this. Their earth, they had been told and believed, belonged to those then living on it. And they'd taken it, and they lived on it, and that was that. The Irish came near to turning this on its head. The earth belonged to the dead. They're in it. Another work of literature, another masterpiece of Irish literature, gives us another way of thinking about the imaginative relationship to the dead, because we are, and in the sense that we are all after all destined to die ourselves. It's beautifully rendered in the closing passage of Joyce's The Dead, as Gabriel Conroy contemplates mortality. A few light taps upon the pane made him turn to the window. It had begun to snow again.
It's your cousin Raymond.
He watched sleepily the flakes, silver and dark, falling obliquely against the lamplight. The time had come for him to set out on his journey westward. It was falling too upon every part of the lonely churchyard on the hill where Michael Fury lay buried. It lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones, on the spears of the little gate, on the barren thorns. His soul swooned as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe and faintly falling, like the descent of their last end, upon all the living and the dead. And that, my friends, is all I have to say on the topic. So I'm hoping that we can talk amongst ourselves and figure out what we want to think about this. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop share. How do we think about this? How do we approach this? This is an important site, and I don't know of any sort of anybody who's really written about this or really examined this in any great detail.
Tony, I have one that I got a hold of. I think I got a hold of it in print, and about maybe within the last year, that the yew trees that are everywhere in the world, they can grow to be 2,000 years old. It's a softwood and it's used for spears too. But the yew tree goes into our bodies in our grave and captures our souls, I think it is, not our heart, or takes our heart, but not our soul. Okay, one or the other, pardon me. But I got a hold of this in print, and I go down there regularly now because my place is down there, and Bill just died 3 years ago, unexpectedly. But hold on now. So I went into Donahoe's and I told him this, and he says, well, half of them are Irish over there, which is true, and he knows all the monuments and so on. And my brother did all the monuments for all of us and didn't say boo. And then he possibly had Donahoe do all of them. We're finding out he did my grandmother's and my aunt's.
Oh, fabulous. And what cemetery is this?
Holy Cross.
Oh, it's Holy Cross. Great.
Yeah.
That's where my great grandparents are.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and the yew trees next door are huge. And
fabulous.
They just up to 2,000 years old, and there's different distributions of them throughout the world. Yeah. And that's all I have.
Thank you.
Not to be disrespectful,
Oh, a bit.
But, and the soul versus the heart,
right.
Funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Becky, you had something to say?
Yeah, Tony, I was interested in your photographic view of the Lone Mountain Catholic Cemetery. And of course, that's where Lone Mountain College USF is now.
Yes.
So what happened to the large cemetery? Did they have to relocate it or
Yes.
what?
That is a great story. Jim Walsh, I'm sure you know about this better than I, but so I have my brother and I have personal interest because we were born there, a few blocks away. There were all cemeteries out there. There were thousands, right, Jim? Thousands of graves, and they moved them all. They disinterred entire cemeteries and moved them out. I reckon Colma was probably the most likely destination.
Okay.
There's the little cemetery, I think it's called Evergreen.
Mhm.
And then there's one area over to the north south of it, where a lot of people are born. We have a William McClatchy who's only 11 days old. And this is before penicillin.
Yeah.
Penicillin's 1906. So and an awful lot were bronchitis, moisture, we're a coastal area.
Yeah.
And you don't catch bronchitis from, you don't know about it till after you catch it. So if you're 11 days old or whatever, for the general populace, we wouldn't know of it.
Yeah.
It's difficult, and it's also sad.
Very sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Ann.
Hey, I just want to share with you, my great, I guess I got the number of greats in there, right? Catherine McKinnon, she was in that Lone Mountain area, and she was interred as a group, a lot of people in a commons plot in Colma.
Mm-hmm.
And they just have their names there, on a memorial,
So they disinterred her from Lone Mountain. They brought them out, the remains out to Colma, and then sort of made a common grave and said, we can't tell who's who.
Yeah, it's there. You can find them, the common grave.
Yeah.
Are their names listed?
And the names are listed.
Names are listed.
Uh-huh.
But you can't have confidence that, they took these remains and they kept them separate from the other remains.
No, they did.
They did. Oh, I see.
That way. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just thought you'd like to.
I think that was around 1923, thereabouts. Jim, is that correct?
Yeah, I can remember in my youth that there were cemeteries around where the car barn was near Kaiser Hospital, a little west of Kaiser Hospital on Geary Street.
I see.
Also, well, Ann and I seem to have the microphone at the moment. One of my father's first jobs when he came to America in 1925 was to help clean up Holy Cross Cemetery for Memorial Day. he did that job as soon as he could. However, one of the sidelights that he mentioned was that a lot of these funeral homes in the Mission District and along Mission Street had direct railroad connection from their funeral home to Holy Cross by special funeral streetcar, so that the coffin would be loaded onto the system streetcar, along with all the mourners and the workers and officials from the funeral home, so that it all go down to Holy Cross on the same streetcar with the coffin, have the burial, and then return again on the same streetcar. I found that interesting, and then I hadn't experienced it myself and wouldn't have known about it unless Steve mentioned it. Thank you.
It's a good thing. You can drink as much as you want.
Yeah.
No Uber then.
Even the conductor and motorman could drink because they couldn't go off the rails.
Where's it going to go? It's not going anywhere.
Holy Cross is supposed to have some of them too. I've talked with Evergreen people. I've forgotten their names. There's an older woman and a younger girl that are very, very helpful if you talk to them directly, and they can kind of direct things. And then Holy Cross is supposed to have some of them, and then maybe some others. But the Evergreen is a good source to start out with, and then go from there. And there's a name for those common graves too, and I've forgotten what it's called.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Imelda, you had, hello, Imelda.
Hello, hello.
Come
everyone.
stato?
Tami kumai Ligia. It was wonderful to see that great photo that you showed of Malloy's.
Yes.
And do you know the man standing by the car?
You know what? I think that's Dad Malloy. That's Mr. Malloy. Because Lanty's father, I think. I looked at that. He said that guy looks like Lanty, but I don't think it's Lanty.
You know who? I don't think it was his father.
Oh,
Lanty's father was my granduncle.
that's right. From Ardara.
From Ardra.
Ardra.
Frank Malloy. He came out just after the earthquake.
Okay.
And he always wore. The only photographs I've ever seen of him, he was wearing a suit and a hat. Sort of old, yeah. So, but the photo is great. I'd love to know more about who that is or get a copy of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you a copy. You know, one of those serendipitous, I don't even know where I got it at this point, but I'll send it to you. And Imelda, while I have you, Cranequilla?
Cranequilla, yeah, Martin.
Cranequilla.
Yes, it's a wonderful novel, a dense novel. And
yeah.
Cranequilla. Cray is the dirt or the dirt of the grave, Cranequilla.
Yeah, yeah. One of the books everyone should be familiar with, I think. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Imelda, here's one thing. My aunt ended up doing the books for Frank Malloy.
Oh,
really?
Here's how this happened. I'll give you some background
that's
on it.
cool.
Oh, all the scoop.
I love it. I love it.
Okay. She owned 2 flats next to Sours on Valencia Street. And before that, we were up in Elizabeth Street, 333 Elizabeth Street. So anyway, here's what goes. Ruane Plastering Company, which, yeah, and they were up on Guerrero, and the Union Hall is right up there, the old little Union Hall and so on. Okay.
Yeah. 14th and Guerrero, 15th?
Something like that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so Imelda, let's see. My aunt did all the books for Ruane's Plastering Company forever. And so, and that was, what's his name? Anyway, they had some sons, and they actually got the contract for the original DeYoung Museum in 1952, I think, the square building. But so they needed a bookkeeper, and apparently they're cousins. Frank Malloy and Ruane are cousins.
Yes.
And if if you go into the series, the little brown series that you buy in Walgreens, that are all pictures and history and stuff, and it'll say Catholics in San Francisco or the Irish in San Francisco. Ruane submitted a whole lot of pictures that he and his wife and his little kids. Bernadette just died, by the way, and Lanty died at 72, and it was really harsh. There was a long obituary in the paper that you probably caught, and kids, tons of kids, and it was written as an Irish obituary would be written. And so anyway, my aunt came in at that time after she was newly retired. And once we drove down there and I saw the little kids, the Malloy kids playing out behind the houses, next to the houses. And we were probably going to cemeteries, and I was probably 8 in 1953, and we peeked in at that time, and Frank was doing, being the bartender. Yeah. So
interesting story. I would love to hear more about all of that history.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Jim, you had something to say, I think.
Yes, I'm thinking of research opportunities and sources that are sometimes overlooked. In your presentation, Tony, you ticked off all the Irish funeral homes or mortuaries or whatever you call them in San Francisco during those days. When I was working on the biography of Mayor and Senator Phelan with my colleague and friend Tim O'Keefe, I had lost track of the woman who was the mistress of Phelan for 42 years. After he kept trying to pension her off in his later years, and it never worked. When he died, before dying, he made another settlement on her behalf privately outside of his will. And I couldn't find out what happened to her. He died around 1930. And then she lived well after World War II. Well, many of you will remember our former colleague and friend, Frank Quinn, who was the registrar of voters in San Francisco.
Wow.
Frank took this challenge on for me and started going through all the mortuary records around San Francisco until he finally found the woman's funeral at one of these funeral homes. And then he was able to get the dates, those that survived her, and everything that was very useful for O'Keefe and myself to put into the biography. So these records exist. A lot of these funeral homes just have an abundance of them down in the basements.
Jim, I'm glad you brought that up. I've heard that, and Steve Welch, who's the scion of the Duggan home, they have very extensive records of all the funerals that Duggan has performed. Steve would be here today, but he's performing a service. I asked him to join us, but it didn't look likely to be able to. So those are important records. Patrick.
Yes.
Welcome.
Tony, thank you, Tony. I want to thank you and commend you for a truly in-depth presentation.
Oh, thank you. I didn't claim to know much. It's just somebody should throw these pictures together and talk about it a little.
So I have a couple question and also a comment. And the question is, where did you get all of the very beautiful and appropriate photographs? Were they all from archives, or were some actually taken for this presentation?
Believe it or not, I just wandered in there and took pictures with my my smartphone.
Well, there you go.
These things just take fantastic. I don't have any talent. They just take fantastic pictures.
Oh, you did it. You did it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And my comment is, we have to be inclusive, and,
Yep.
and we have to look for hidden history. So
Right.
the point I'll make is, where were the Indians buried?
Right.
And
So,
this is part
yeah.
of the mission. This is a major part. It's not the subject of your talk, so I didn't expect it to be included here, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to point out, for example, the issue of Father Sarah and
Yep.
the statue being toppled at Mission's
Right.
San Rafael Archangel in Marin, where
Yep.
the Archbishop is pressing strongly for prosecution of the 5 Native Americans, for them for sure, who committed the act on behalf of their constituents, who are talking about the treatment of the Indians by the missionaries and Father Sarah in particular. So that's just something I wanted to put on the record, that we can take this opportunity to look at that as well.
Pat, I commend you for this. Thank you. And I want to share an image that I didn't have really time to highlight. I'm going to share the screen briefly and show you that you see the far right, the structure on the far right of these pictures. I think you can see.
Yes.
That's a monument to the Native American population. I'm using the term, I prefer to use the appropriate names of the tribes and so forth. But I settled on Native American for this presentation because I couldn't be certain, and I wanted to use the right names of the tribes, or not use any at all, and also use all of the names of all of the tribes that might have been represented here. And absent a sort of definitive, what's the word? The definitive accepted account, I didn't want to try to do that, so I said Native American. But the gentleman who's the archivist, curator now is in fact descended, Charlie, you know about this, descended from these tribes.
Vince Medina?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's who it is, yeah. So there is, and I know that I've toured some missions, went to the mission Buenaventura in Ventura, and I know that their displays are prominently they're at least attempting to address the issues and the ways that people think about this. It's hard to allude to it in a presentation like this, appropriately or sufficiently. So I kind of opted to really not.
Well,
But
you're
that-
being
that-
sensitive
Yeah.
in your terminology and treatment. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much.
So Tony, could you describe the structure? Is it a open structure? Are we looking at the back of it?
We're
or-
looking at the back of it. Let me blow it up a little, if I can do that. See it a little better. Can you see it a little bit better?
Yeah.
There
And
it
what
is.
would be the platform on top? What was
I
that?
don't know anything about why it's
Okay.
built this way.
Probably the
Um,
real platform symbol.
I mean, there was a custom of exposing the dead to the air,
Yeah.
which would make it appropriate in a
Oh, yeah,
graveyard.
laying dead on high platforms.
Oh,
Yeah.
so
That
they
was
lay it on
popular in
top?
the Southwest.
Is
Yeah,
that
on
right?
top, on
Oh,
top.
interesting. Very interesting.
One of the remote reservations that Uta and I spend time on in Montana breaks the law every year because they do bury their dead on the platforms in the air. And of course, it's against the federal law, but it's still actually being done in secrecy.
I see.
Oh. And if you went to the graveyard, would you find a plaque or a marker explaining what it is?
I'd be making it. I'd be making up an answer. I should say I don't know.
Okay,
Sorry, I don't remember.
yeah. Looks like it's been there for a while.
Yes,
Mhm.
Jim. Yes.
Were there grave markers for any Native Americans at the
No,
cemetery?
not that I could see.
Oh, God.
So
Were
you have this list.
Yeah.
And I
were
think
there
this
even
is all
grave-
Euro Americans, as it were.
Uh,
There may be one. Excuse me.
That's the whole point, that they're completely omitted, and
That's right.
we
Yeah.
have to look for the answer to remedy that.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, I doubt that there are any.
Yeah, you couldn't really go by the name because of intermarriage and so forth.
That's true.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, Tony, is there any outreach that's done by local historians to mortuaries and to places like Donahoe's to make sure they understand how important their records are, and to make sure, if they end up, closing down or
Yeah.
something, that the records get passed on to a place where they can be maintained?
I don't know. I wish my friend Elizabeth Creeley was here, because she just conducted a tour of the of Valencia Street, or was part of it. I don't know, and they should be. And that's why Duggan's is so important, because it's the last one. The last one of those in the mission.
Well, and I'm thinking, Donahoe's has done the monuments, just going back, what, at
Right.
least,
Yeah.
70 years, something like that.
Yeah.
They they did the monuments for both the same young fellow. He's not young anymore, but his father was in charge when he did the monument for my father in 79. And then now he's 65, 66, and he just did the monument a couple of years ago for my mother. So, they go way back, and their records would be it would be
Yeah.
a shame to lose them.
Yeah. Yes. These monuments are in marvelous, give testament to many unexpected things. And you don't know what you'll encounter, but some people find it very important to include certain things about their loved ones on the memorials. And sometimes you can find it quite surprising.
Yeah.
There's a lot of serendipity in this,
Well, I'm thinking too, there in Ireland, there are a lot of lost records. At one point, a lot of Irish birth records were lost, and they've had to go back to the parish records and to cemeteries to fill in some of those gaps.
Oh,
It would
yeah.
be, I mean, you're probably aware of that, I think, because of a lot of the Irish records that were burned up. I can't remember if it was the Irish post office fire, but
Oh,
one of the ways that they reconstructed those is by going back to parish records and to cemeteries.
I see.
And the records here are also an interesting, augmentation of records, not just for the records here, but also Irish, the records of people born in Ireland who died here.
Mhm.
But anyway.
Those raise interesting issues. Jim?
Can't let the party die at this point, so we have to ask more questions.
Absolutely. I had a brief lapse there. I was hoping you'd fill the gap.
In order to keep it going, you mentioned Irish women
Yes.
in the early days and why they were here.
I mean,
There-
1850s, Jim, not like when we came in the 1880s, when my
Yeah.
great grandmother came,
Yeah.
but the 1850s, that's a whole different story.
Yeah, well, there was a little bit of advantage. One of the books of years ago, whose author I can't remember, and I unfortunately donated my library. It dealt with Irish women in America and coming to America, why they left and how they traveled and their arrival and whatnot. But anyway, the conclusion was that the more Irish women immigrated to America than Irish men.
Mhm.
So there's an advantage of numbers there, which would, I guess, swell the base from which some could have come west even in those early days. And then there was a book by another author whose name I can't remember. She was a dean up at the University of Pacific, and she dealt with business women in San Francisco in the late 19th century, maybe earlier, but certainly the late 19th century. And one of her conclusions was the preponderance of Irish women that were in business in San Francisco. The millinery business,
Oh, yeah.
boarding houses,
Yeah.
ran hotels and stuff like that. So there were a couple of hints or clues. These books could be in the bibliography somewhere in the Irish Literary and Historical Society's second book,
Okay.
The Irish in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So anybody that wanted to hunt that out would deal with business women in San Francisco and Irish women coming to America.
Okay, that's a book right there, that somebody needs to do it, right?
I guess so.
And in parallel, I don't know if you remember, Janet Nolan is a historian. I believe she's in Rhode Island. Basically wrote the book on Irish lay school teachers, and in San Francisco, you think of clergy typically, but lay school teachers, in many big cities, more than half of the teachers were Irish women and Irish Americans, and so you think about an entire. I'd love to think of because my mother's a teacher and she runs into people at Costco. Someone who's 6'7" who said, "Mrs. Bucher used to teach me in kindergarten." It happens all the time. Did I teach you? So, she's influenced, many people, right? So it's I'm getting emotional, but you think about all those women and all the young people that they influenced. And once you're influenced by a great teacher, you're influenced for life. Now that's an undertold story, isn't it?
Can I say?
Yeah, go ahead, raise your hand.
Oh, I just want to point out something. These Irish that I have, they came from New Brunswick, and they're two sisters. And they have, their mentor was a priest, I'm trying to remember his name, a well-known priest in San Francisco that also came from New Brunswick. So they had a kind of a sister in that form.
Yeah.
And anyway, they made their way, but they were both of them married the same guy, because after the first sister died, then the second one came. and married the same fella in a little hometown, my hometown of Rio Vista. But anyway,
Oh.
I mean, you know, and the name, their last name then became Rubel. Before that, it was Doyle, right?
There you
Okay,
go.
so that's the Irish part. So, but going back to that mass grave of this other McKinnon, Catherine McKinnon, it's called mass burial in Holy Cross Catholic Cemetery.
Oh,
And the number is the mass grave memorial, and the number is 22361.
You could look it up. Yeah.
Look it up. Yeah.
22361 is what number?
And that is the memorial number, as they call it, in this site that's called Mass Grave. Mhm.
Yeah.
Holy Cross Catholic. So, okay. That's
Thanks.
it.
Thank you.
Okay.
You know, they had a, they recognized that the Norwegians had ancient, you know, were in 1027, I think it was, they arrived in Newfoundland. And I called a Norwegian American friend and said, you know, our people were willing to welcome you, you know, to Newfoundland in 1027. You should thank us.
Did they?
Probably not.
Also, the Irish settled in the capital of Nebraska, I guess. There were a whole group of them, just like the Minnesota and how all of those little communities happened. That's even more so, but it's supposed to have happened. Yeah. Where we settled and why we settled in different spots, you know. Yeah.
And they had a political machine, and it was Tom Pendergrast, right, in Omaha.
That I don't know about. See, yeah.
Well, he was Harry Truman's benefactor.
Oh,
That's
okay.
all I know. But you know, or was it Kansas? No, I'm sorry, no, Kansas City, not Omaha. There was another machine in Omaha, though.
Okay. Yeah, because my friend had an association, I guess his name is Tom Carey with an E, and he's from that area, and he expressed that, you know, there are, and it goes way back as well. More I don't know.
Tom Walsh was asking if there were any Irish, is any Irish language on any of the gravestones, and there weren't. It would be a heck of a good story if there had been. Latin and English and Latin were the
Irish
only
language sayings on the
and
gravestones. He
on
answered.
the Irish graves.
Well, the question, follow-up question is, were the gravestones, was there a central person who made gravestones and monuments and things like that? Or was it all individually crafted?
Does anybody know that who, if there was a gravestone maker in that area at that time?
Donahoe might know
Donahoe
because
might know.
he was way down the other end to begin with. There's old rail houses, workhouses, I guess, down the other end. And there's also the old, what do you call it, beltway down as you turn off. They're changing all that now, but the houses are still there in the beltway. Hold on, but he might know a little bit of it.
Is that out in Colma or in the Outer Mission?
It's right opposite, if you take Holy Cross, the main part of Holy Cross, it's right south of that, Donahoe Memorials.
Thank you.
And it used to be Donahoe and Carroll, and then Carroll left, they parted ways, I guess. Yeah.
I see.
There was, I'm looking at the ad right now. I was about to post it on the library's social media. There was a Sunset Monument Works at 45 29th Street in San Francisco.
Oh,
And I pulled this ad out of the Leader, and I was having so much fun in there. It was somewhere between 1919 and 1923. And the proprietor is listed as a Charles T. Zambruno
In the end, and here-
for this. But there are other funerary and monument makers listed in the Leader that were in the Mission area and Colma
thank you.
early on.
That's library is a terrific resource. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Sorry, I still have hat head this morning, so you get to look at the library, not me.
Yeah.
Cursor at the end of the names.
Well, do we have any other questions or comments?
Hit enter.
Actually, Tony, thank you for this. I'm seeing a lot of thanks in the chat as well. This
Yeah.
is wonderfully researched and topical, and I love it, especially because I
Well,
did
thank you
miss
very much.
Elizabeth's walking tour.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
this was a wonderful tie-in to that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I thought it'd be a good companion piece. Just kind of, it's, you know, you could, the graveyard is such a rich place, really unlike anything else I can think of for thinking about history, approaching history and culture. And it's so intertwined with family stories and individual stories. It's just unlike anything else. And then, of course, Emmons, who surprised me, which I included, basically borrowed his work because he's so makes such a clear statement about the really how different the Irish were of that era, obviously not today necessarily, of that era were in the ways they thought about the dead. And then you have these works of literature, which are kind of allude to the same thing. And accessing that through literature, I think, is a marvelous way to understand it, because these people aren't around anymore to tell us what they thought.
Hey, you mentioned they took the graves out of San Francisco's outer cemeteries. They took them out, but they didn't take all of them out. They keep digging down and uncovering some graves out there.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's true.
So Charlie and I were born, I like to think Charlie and I were born on grave sites, and that's why we're the way we are.
It's possible. We're very morbid.
Kaiser Hospital.
Yeah.
And
very
Gary.
morbid.
Perfecto.
We have a moment to say hello to our friend Miles in Ireland. Hello, Miles. Well, if he joins us, he'll join us. Hi, Miles. Hello, Miles. Miles, do you have anything to weigh in on here?
He's muted. You need to unmute, Miles.
Yeah, I'm asking to unmute.
There.
There he is.
Hey, Miles. Miles. You
Miles.
can't be muted.
Miles Dungan.
Oh my God. What a shower.
Impresario, historian extraordinaire, direct from Kells County Meath.
Do you know something, Tony? Do you know where I am at the moment? I'm in my local Indian restaurant collecting my evening meal. Sorry. I just thought I thought I'd sneakily check in because we've just finished trick or treating. I thought I'd sneakily check in for a few minutes. So I didn't think I was going to become the object of attention.
Well, we're just closing out, so I did want to say hello. That's all.
You're finishing?
Yeah.
Oh, hang on. Daylight saving time.
Yeah, there's that.
No,
Sorry,
we're not.
I thought it was. There's only a 7-hour time difference at the moment. Good God.
Yeah. No, not a problem.
Oh, that's really clever on my part. Well done, Miles. Well
Not a
done.
problem.
I missed it. It's been recorded though, hasn't it?
It is. It is.
Grant. Okay,
Yeah.
so I might
So-
be able to see it.
Maybe Tony will get you to announce where it's posted so we can review, because there's definitely some material I'd love to refer back to from your presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're going to do is per Catherine Berry's suggestion, is create a YouTube channel and post all of our talks on that.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and that's the way to go. sure.
I can shamelessly offer you ours if you'd like.
Thank you.
Tony, could I ask one more question?
Yes, Tom Walsh.
I'm just wondering if you, this is just off the top of my head, movies in which the cemetery shows up. I can think of Vertigo, but movies in which, because it's the cemetery is quite iconic. The San Francisco.
No.
Mission
Yeah.
Dolores is. So I'm wondering if you could think of any other movies besides Vertigo where the Mission Dolores cemetery shows up.
I can't.
Because she walks, it's a beautiful scene. It's very well directed. She walks through it. A lot of the things you showed are right there.
Yeah.
So,
I want to ask, that's an opportunity to ask a question. If we were to, am I the only one who sees this as a very important site for our community? And if we were to sort of, it's not widely known. I know plenty of people who grew up in the city who didn't even really know about this place.
really?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
San Francisco is so walkable. I would think anybody who grew up in the city would have encountered it at some point.
Well, if you're out in Holy Names Parish, Tom, it's kind of far.
Oh no, but I'm just saying.
I'm teasing.
Well, of course, yeah, that's right. It's not far by. It's close by San Francisco standards. But the thing is, of course, the Irish moved from Mission to the Sunset.
Yeah.
So was a reason to go back to the Mission, and just as a young person wandering around San Francisco, that's one of the places you'd see. So, but I think you're right. That's very important. I think there's something more to pursue here, and you've done such a great job that this is a good start.
Thank you. It's just a start, but
it's a good start. Yeah.
It would be wonderful to sort of close the loop is to find if there were any descendants of people buried there who were still around. I was thinking that might be relevant.
Yeah. So is that the list you posted, is that a complete list of who's in the graveyard?
Apparently so, yes.
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't mind seeing that. Yeah.
I think some of those people will be running around tonight. I mean, the people that are named in the headstones.
That's right.
Out around tonight, we'll bump into them.
Then we'll bump into them.
It's supposed to go through tomorrow too, Celtic.
Right.
Tomorrow at dinner time or midnight or something? Yeah. So they're already here, I guess, huh?
I see. Yeah. Well, I guess that'll close us out for today. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. It was great fun to see you all, and I hope to see you. And I really want to strongly recommend this event in 3 weeks' time with a very, very nice, very interesting couple of people, Beth Mannion and another gentleman whose name I've forgotten, who've written, a recent book on Irish crime writing, and are just terrific people. So it's going to be good fun.
Thank you, Tony, for today.
Thanks very much, Tony.
Thank you very much. For wonderful to see you all, and I'll see you again soon.
Okay, bye.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Miles.
Bye, Miles.